How are you doing?
Honestly,
Honestly,
I'm doing very well.
I'm happy for you. I will ask questions and you will hopefully answer.
I will try. Depends on the questions.
We are facing a non-trivial task today. There are actually 20 topics. There are 20 because you have been in office at the helm for 20 years. Now, the year is 2020, and that is quite symbolic.
Let us not forget that I was Prime Minister for 4 years, not President.
The resignation of the government. There are a lot of jokes and witticisms on this subject on the internet. The first was probably as follows. Because of the unusually warm weather in Russia, its government has melted away like the snow.
That is funny.
Here's what it looks like.
Okay, but why exactly did it melt away in Parliament? I do not understand.
Well, I suppose they just found this picture.
You know, the internet is an interesting tool, but at times inaccurate.
True. And now, all kidding aside, in fact, Medvedev's government, his cabinet, underwent a reshuffle not that long ago, just in 2018, after the election. Some left, Dvorkovich, Shuvalov, Men, Abizov, though let us not even go there in the latter's case. So they started to work. What happened over this year and a half to provoke?
First, more might have happened in a year and a half or 2 years. Secondly, the previous cabinet has already done a lot in terms of preparing the main phase of the implementation of national projects. They had to identify national development goals. And this only seems easy at first glance. In fact, it is an enormous effort. Then tools needed to be developed on which to rely in order to achieve these national goals. The government did that as well. But then I felt some inner certainty that this is when new people should come in to pursue work in new areas of crucial importance. People with modern training and commitment to achieving the overarching goal on key development elements. I would like to draw your attention to the fact that the core has remained. Some people from the executive office, including those directly involved in the work on national projects, have moved to the government. This is of paramount importance, I believe. I will tell you why. If they were behind the development of these national projects and the goals we are expected to achieve in terms of national development, it stands to logic that they should be tasked with putting into practice exactly what they have suggested as these goals and tools to achieve them. Therefore, some people from the executive office have come to the government to do it, because that is where it's done.
And some from the government have moved on to the executive office.
Yes, let them work here.
So, changing the order of the addends does change the sum?
Yes, it does, for sure. That is why there is nothing unusual or unexpected here. You can, of course, ask me. I did say there would be no change, no plans for that. Yes, I did. If I had said that I was going to change the government tomorrow, all work would have just stopped the day after tomorrow. As the saying goes, call it a day and hit the hay.
That is why we call it a special operation.
It is not.
No one knew. Did anyone know?
I did.
Anybody else?
Is that not enough?
When did you make the decision?
I will not say.
When did you tell Medvedev?
This is between the two of us.
But we should know, shouldn't we?
We have enjoyed very frank, collegial, friendly relations with Mr. Medvedev for many years. We have no secrets from one another. Therefore, we discussed this issue with him.
You mean earlier? Or did you just confront him with the fact?
We discussed it earlier and he knew what was going on.
He has been given a position invented for him specifically, which never existed. You even had to hastily adopt a law to provide for this post.
Why hastily? The law was adopted.
The appointment came first and the law followed.
There is nothing out of the ordinary here. If there is something in the legislation that needs adjustment, the President, in accordance with the fundamental law, has the right to fill in this gap in the legislation by issuing an executive order, which will be followed by the adoption of a relevant law. This is normal practice, nothing unusual.
There is a certain feeling of hastiness, as if you needed some solution.
Your feeling is not exactly the same as reality. You may have all sorts of feelings. You may feel that you are running a high temperature, judging by your senses, but this may not be the case. You need a thermometer to know whether you have a fever or not. So, we have nothing out of the ordinary here. I will say it again. The legal practice is as follows. If there is a gap in the legislation, a president issues an executive order, and the provision is later implemented through a law. Just wait a second. This is number one. Number two is the question, why should we wait to decide on such issues? What will that achieve? According to those who do not have a clear understanding of what is going on, or are critical about it, would it be better to spend another 6 months after the resignation of the government in order to form a new one? Can you imagine what a mess the country would be in? There should never be a gap in power. Never. Everything should be discussed and thought through in advance, in a calm and business-like manner. Each step should be prepared, and then the decision should be taken and implemented. We cannot afford to muddle along here. Russia is not Belgium that can stay a whole year without any government.
The new government is yet another topic, and I would like to get back to the old one. Zhirinovsky suggested that the Security Council Deputy Chairman be referred to as Vice President. It is so at face value?
No, because a Vice President is the one to step in for the President, assuming all his or her rights and responsibilities. We have introduced the post of Deputy Chairman of the Security Council. The President is Chairman of the Security Council, and now I have a deputy on this particular track.
Another joke on the internet. The duo has fallen out of sync.
Nothing is out of sync.
The tandem...
We are working with Mr. Medvedev as we used to. He has switched to another track in his career. That is true and natural too.
As for the choice you made of the new Prime Minister, who was on the shortlist? They mentioned Mishustin, Sobyanin. You had 2 executive orders for signing on the table, and you were hesitating till the last moment.
No one mentioned Mishustin except me. I can tell you that there were 3 candidates.
3?
Yes, 3, or maybe even 4 candidates were submitted. But Mishustin was not on the list.
So this was your...
Mine.
What was your reasoning?
I took into account Mr. Mishustin's personal traits and professional skills.
And the result of digitalization he carried out at the institution he headed. Did you take this into account?
I did. Not so much the fact that he carried it out, but the fact that he really became an expert in this area, a man of practice, who understands very well what needs to be done and who knows how to do it. And he is doing it and achieving concrete results.
What about the fact that he is a tax collector by trade? In other words, he is accustomed to taking, while this position is more about giving.
This is a very primitive understanding of the work of the tax service. Yes, of course, it is one of the main bodies bringing funds to the state treasury. However, to think that a tax collector walks around with a club squeezing money out of people is very primitive. No, it's quite the opposite. His mission was to ease the situation for taxpayers, to make the procedure more transparent and clear, and less burdensome for citizens. An honest man, who knows he properly pays all due taxes, has the right to expect that the state will use the money wisely. But the first thing to do is not to simply extract money from people. It is to organize the system in such a way that both the state and the taxpayers could comfortably work with each other, and it would be clear how things are arranged, and everybody could pay taxes without impediment, without unnecessary hassle and stress, and without running the risk of doing something that the state may interpret as illegal.
When this team was formed, some noticed, first of all, that you had broken, or at least it was perceived that way, certain rules that you used to stick to, such as not to turn your back on your old mates, to avoid dismissals of those criticized, and not to pay heed to critics on the internet, to public opinion. This time, the most toxic figures, who had been most fiercely criticized in the media or social networks, walked away to be replaced by no-names. That is, people you had to Google or Yandex.
You know, the criterion was not the lack of knowledge about those people, it was their professional qualifications. I know, and Mikhail Mishustin knows, these people as competent professionals. And I was to a considerable extent guided specifically by his opinion in this regard. There were a number of candidates whom I had doubts about, but Mr. Mishustin would prove to me that this or that person was best fit for the job. I agreed with him because, at the end of the day, he was forming his own team, and the final concrete result it achieves will depend on the efficiency of its work.
What window of time do they have? I mean, when will you evaluate their professional efficiency?
There is no window of time. All of these people are, I will say it again, competent. They all are well informed and know their job. Many of them worked one way or another on the national projects and national development targets, so they are totally in the know. Thus, there can be no window, no time for warming up.
The next subject is Ukraine. Have you seen the Servant of the People series?
No.
Even the segment when President Goloborodko is choosing a watch like yours?
I haven't seen it. I don't know either Goloborodko or who is choosing what there. I haven't seen it.
Okay, though very interesting pair forms, a galley slave and a servant of the people.
As you know, whatever goes around comes around. Ultimately, it's not what you call yourself, it's what you do and how you do it.
Is there a chance that you come to terms with Zelensky?
What about?
About peace, about friendship?
Hope is the last thing to die. Yes, there is a chance. But unfortunately, after his return from Paris, he started talking about the necessity to revise the Minsk agreements. This begs the question. Nevertheless, we managed to agree on the exchange of detained persons, and we now managed to agree on gas.
Does the fact that today we're not friends with Ukraine represent a loss for us?
Yes, of course. But as I have repeatedly said, I believe that we are one and the same people.
The Ukrainians don't like it very much either.
I don't know whether they like this or not, but if you look at the reality, that is true. You see, we had no difference in our languages until the 11th, 12th and 13th centuries. And only as a result of Polonization, the part of the Ukrainians who lived in the territory under the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, only around the 16th century, the first language differences appeared. In general, the Ukrainians were the people who lived on the frontiers of the Russian state. There were Ukrainians in Pskov. Ukrainians were the people who defended the southern frontiers from attacks by the Crimean Khan. Ukrainians were in the Urals. Ukrainians were everywhere. We had no language differences. Moreover, around the same time, before the 14th and 15th centuries, even those people, the East Slavs, who lived in the territory of the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, both in Muscovy and in Poland, were called Russians. The first language differences appeared much later.
History is history, but now we're talking about the present day.
To talk about today or tomorrow, we need to know history. We need to know who we are, where do we come from, what unites us. What unites us is...
Now many things divide us.
Many things divide us, but we should not forget about the things that unite us, and should not destroy what we have. For example, the Church. Why did one need to destroy the unity of the Russian Orthodox Church? You know that the Ukrainian Orthodox Church of the Moscow Patriarchate is in fact fully autonomous. It has been fully autonomous before, including in terms of the election of hierarchs of the Ukrainian Orthodox Church of the Moscow Patriarchate. The Moscow Patriarchate has never had any influence on the election of hierarchs of the Ukrainian Orthodox Church of the Moscow Patriarchate. In fact, it has always been independent, completely. There has been only spiritual unity and mentioning. The Patriarch of Moscow has been mentioned, recalled all the time in churches. That's it. It has been the only thing uniting the Russian Orthodox Church and the Ukrainian Orthodox Church of the Moscow Patriarchate. But they needed to cut the cords that bind. Why? You say people do not understand. They simply do not know it. If they know, they will understand better. They should be told that. Why should one be embarrassed? Is it insulting for people? Some time passed. As a result of people sharing the border with the Catholic world, with Europe, a community of people feeling to some extent independent from the Russian state began to emerge. How should we feel about that? I have already said we should respect that, but we should not forget about our shared community. Moreover, in the modern world, our joint efforts give us huge competitive advantages, and vice versa, division makes us weaker. The Ukrainian factor was specifically played out on the eve of World War I by the Austrian Special Service. Why? It is well known, to divide and rule. Absolutely clear. Nevertheless, if it happened this way, and a big part of the Ukrainian population got a sense of their own national identity and so on, we should respect that. We should proceed from the reality, but not forget who we are and where we come from. By the way, the fathers of the Ukrainian nationalism, they never spoke about the urgent need to break up with Russia. Strange as it may seem, but their major works of the 19th century say that Ukraine is A, multinational and should be a federal state, and B, should build good relations with Russia. Today's nationalists seem to have forgotten that. I will tell you why they have forgotten that. You know why? Because the interests of the Ukrainian people are not the main issue on their agenda. How can it be the interest of the Ukrainian people if the breakup with Russia has led to a loss of space engineering, shipbuilding, aircraft engineering, and engine manufacturing? It is virtually the deindustrialization of the country that is happening. How can it be among interests? The World Bank demands to stop cross-subsidizing. What's good in it? Or they make them export round wood from the Carpathians. Soon the Carpathians will turn bald. Why do this if by joining efforts we increase our competitive advantages manifold? Why lose it? Why throw everything away? What for? Because the Ukrainian leaders, or those who got power, pursued their self-interests. And what were they? It was not even to earn more by robbing the Ukrainian people, but to retain what has been plundered before. This is the main objective. So where is the dough, pardon my slang? Where is the money? In foreign banks. What do they need to do for this? Show that they serve those who have this money. Hence the only thing they sell is Russophobia. Because some like dividing Ukraine and Russia. They believe it's a very important mission. Because any integration of Russia and Ukraine, along with their capacities and competitive advantages, would lead to the emergence of a rival, a global rival for Europe and the world. No one wants it. That's why they'll do anything to pull us apart.
The national projects. This is the classic. The first step is always the hardest.
Why?
At the end of the year, you said they still had not taken off.
First, that is not what I said. Well, not exactly. That's the first thing. Secondly, I always have to.
People did not feel the results. This is a quote, very close to the original.
First of all, I have to not only constantly keep my finger on the pulse of things, but I have to keep them, those who are responsible for handling these tasks, all under pressure. And believe me.
Do you have to jolt them into action?
Yes, jolting them into action is necessary. It is essential to keep people on top of their responsibility. They need to be under constant administrative pressure. Otherwise, as I have seen from sufficiently significant experience, as soon as the pressure, the heat is gone, people generally begin to slack off. This is why I said what I said. That's one thing. Another thing is that it is true that not everything has been accomplished. Out of the 38 tasks set for this year, 26 have been accomplished and the others have not.
For this year? Do you mean 2019?
The others have not been accomplished. Nevertheless, 26 targets were met. And you say that the people have not felt this yet.
It was you who said this.
Well, yes, in some respects. I said the effects should have been felt. But in some respects, they were not felt. But what is really important is to ensure that the people not just know, but feel the real effects of this. Take relocation from dilapidated housing. We have accomplished innumerably more than we had anticipated, and people were definitely able to feel the effects. That is obvious. This is the first thing. A solution does not appear out of thin air. It has to be worked on, and appropriate resources must be allocated that will have to be redirected from resolving other tasks. Things will not appear out of the blue. We can say, it should not be this way. Is that it? But who is going to do this? It is the people who do it. Or take the objective of raising life expectancy. It has increased already, and in the past year as well. That is the result of a lower mortality rate, which has gone down significantly. That is an actual fact. You understand, don't you?
But the year ended with a population decline.
Last year saw a population decline because...
And the rate was significant.
260,000. I know. I know nearly every figure.
I have no doubt.
And you do not need to, because I deal with this every day. It was clearly understood well in advance. Look at our situation. The number of school children has grown, and it will continue to grow in the coming years. Why? Because a rather sizable generation reached their reproductive age several years ago, some 7 to 10 years ago. Yet now the number of people that have entered into their childbearing years is far lower. That was the result of two plunges in birth rate, one in 1943-1944 and the other in the mid-1990s. These two bottomed out, causing a depression. Therefore, we have fewer people in their childbearing years. The number of women aged 20 to 29 is down by 4.5 million. That is it. These are objective statistics.
I'm not saying that we should not have the national projects. I'm talking about what could be. You have extensive experience. Take, for example, hosting the Sochi Olympics, the FIFA World Cup, or the APEC summit in Vladivostok. A specific target is set, a powerful shot follows, and we score. Hurrah!
I do not need any hurrahs. I want to see the country developing steadily, confidently, rhythmically, and comprehensively. What you have just said, yes, I certainly find it very pleasing. Not what you said, but when I see the outcome, I'm pleased. When I visit Vladivostok, during the drive from the airport, I glance back at the airport building first. How it was built is a different story. Then I look at the Federal University. A whole campus has been built there. It is always a pleasure to see. And look at how Sochi is developing. But these are singular results, while we need comprehensive achievements. Singular projects are not enough. All the instruments that might have been used before, including state programs, no longer meet the objectives that we are faced with. I have already said this and would like to repeat. The difference between a national project and a state program is that we identify specific tasks, for instance, demographic ones.
Seems so German.
Yes, absolutely right. 1, 2, 3. Yes, specific tasks. Secondly, we determine the amount of resources, the extra resources needed to fulfill these tasks. Thirdly, we appoint those responsible. We have never had this sort of targeting before. There are certain problems arising from the fact that we have national targets and national projects as a means of achieving these goals. We might need to combine these elements. Some colleagues have been calling for this. All this has to be arranged and fine-tuned in the process of practical work. We cannot just wait and watch the water flow under the bridge.
What makes your national projects different from Medvedev's?
There were no Medvedev national projects, in the sense of the projects we are working on now.
In other words, back then it was just a campaign slogan.
It was not a slogan. There were state programs back then. Let me point out the difference once again. A common problem was identified and then joint work was organized to tackle it, but it was unclear how to do it. Now, as I've said, we have set the goals, for instance, demographically related ones, to reach certain thresholds on average life expectancy. To achieve these goals, we allocate specific resources to fight cancer, to address cardiovascular diseases, to improve traffic rules and reduce road mortality rates, to build up the road network, and so on. Each issue implies personal responsibility. That is what the national projects are all about. We have never used such tools before.
Are any of these national projects under your constant control?
All of them are.
All of them?
Yes, of course.
In other words, in a way that...
Yes, of course.
One of them that you would monitor all the time?
Life expectancy is the main integrator.
I have noticed that you mentioned it 3 times.
Well, it reflects all the other issues. The mortality rate should diminish and life expectancy should increase. By the way, we have certain achievements in addressing these issues. Cardiovascular diseases and tuberculosis, road accidents, the number of victims has abated. The number of fatalities, those killed in accidents, has significantly declined.
Yet, some skepticism remains regarding.
Skepticism has always been there. It is here and always will be here. This is good.
Kudrin again said that these are not the ties that bind, and are unlikely to become that.
Skepticism always pushes forward those who must achieve concrete results. Kudrin has been doing a good job, and when he was Minister of Finance, he advocated a strict macroeconomic policy and less spending. Now he believes that...
Are you being ironic?
No, I'm not. It has always been this way. I remember him well enough as Minister of Finance. He was against every issue. For instance, he strongly opposed building the ring road around St. Petersburg. He and Gref, the Minister of Economics and the Minister of Finance, visited me twice. They agreed to allocate funds to build the ring road around St. Petersburg only when I snapped at them. The same happened with many other projects. For instance, they were against building a bridge to Ruski Island because it was too expensive. They were against certain infrastructure facilities in Sochi. We do not need them. Too expensive, they said. In the end, everything was built, and it keeps on working and lives on, thank God. In all cases, they kept saying that there were other more important objectives, that the macroeconomic situation must be taken care of, that the budget must not be thrown off balance. Now he believes that we have enough resources, that we can ease our macroeconomic and fiscal policy a bit and revise the cut-off price applied to oil and gas revenues, while allocating more oil and gas income, roughly speaking, to consumption.
Well, the viewpoint has changed.
The viewpoint has certainly changed, and apparently one can see better, because the viewer is no longer afraid of being socked in the eye.
Aha, like that.
Well, of course. He has no direct responsibility. And the people he worked with, his disciples to an extent, they feel somewhat perplexed.
When was the last time you called a judge? When was the last time you called a judge?
I never call judges, at all. I meet with judges from time to time, I mean my former university classmates. There are many judges among them.
What about those who are in office?
There are some who are currently in office. However, I meet with them as my classmates, and not in their capacity as judges.
With whom?
With my class, unimates.
Does that expression exist?
Well, let's say I've invented it.
Do you know what case was the most high profile in 2019?
No.
The Ivan Golunov case.
Yes, I heard about it.
And it became a high profile one, in part because active members of society were very disgruntled with what was done to that young man, a journalist.
There was nothing good about it, true.
Most likely, he could have ended up behind bars.
Yes, but that didn't happen.
It didn't happen because people got involved.
That's good. That's very good.
Is that the only way to guarantee justice?
Look, what I want to say is people getting involved.
Yes.
That makes a difference in today's Russia. And it's good. Currently, I think,
5 people have been detained.
the situation evolves in a simple way.
It would have been
Law
better
enforcement
if
agencies
the
are
mastermind
looking into the
behind it
matter.
all had been found.
Some have been fired, some detained. Do you want them to beat confessions out of the people, or to obtain them in due course in accordance with the law? The latter seems to be the better option. But it takes time. There shouldn't be any rush, nor any haste.
Konstantin Kotov as well. His case is currently being reviewed, and the Constitutional Court has ordered that things got going after this issue had been referred to you personally, after the news conference. So it appears that the president's personal involvement, this hands-on control, does matter after all.
It appears that the president, acting as the guarantor of the Constitution, has such a right and must respond to these sorts of issues, which we see happening in real life.
It turns out, as the actual figures stand, the percentage of acquittals in 2018 was 0.23%.
Do you know what the prison population was in the early 2000s?
No idea.
It actually halved.
The prison population? You mean those behind bars?
Yes, the number halved, decreased in an unnoticeable manner with no fuss. In fact, it's actually a sort of revolutionary development. It has been taking place gradually as a result of various decisions liberalizing the legal responsibility of citizens who committed minor offenses or are first-time offenders and so on. It halved.
You know perfectly well. I don't have to tell you that there were some cases that sparked a widespread public outcry.
That happens.
Everything is judged based on just one fact.
I understand.
They judge everything. The Srebrenikov case, for instance. How much longer must it last? And you will say again that this is for the court to decide.
Of course.
They have already put their signatures and names on petitions.
Who put their signatures and names on petitions?
People who have prestige in society, prominent people, they penned a petition for him.
Andrei, listen to me. The opinions of people respected in society are important. I think that the court takes into account the opinions of respected people, but still, it has to make judgments based not on their opinions, but based on the law and legal awareness.
Certainly. However, there was an incident which triggered just as
Yes.
much of a public uproar. This concerns the Moscow rallies last summer, when the battle,
Everyone can...
which, in your interpretation, immediately turned into something. Okay, somebody threw a bottle. You draw a parallel right there with Paris and Hong Kong.
This cannot be allowed. Today they throw a bottle, tomorrow a chair, then cars are smashed to pieces. It cannot be allowed. Things mustn't get out of hand. It has to be within the law.
And the National Guard of Russia? Why are the troops so vulnerable, timid?
They are both vulnerable and timid. They are doing their job, and they must do it. Moreover, they're dealing with protesters. Tomorrow they will face a barrage of bullets. And what's more, they take part in combat operations. And when somebody spreads information over the internet that their children should be killed, what in the world is that? This is being said about those who, if the motherland calls, have to put themselves in the line of fire to protect the interests of the state, society, and our particular citizens. You know, this can really disrupt the country's balance. To an extent, there will be hell to pay. We can't risk it.
When nightsticks are wielded,
Nobody resorts to swinging a nightstick without a reason.
Mr. President,
Please, listen to me. If people act within the existing rules and laws, who would want to swing a nightstick? On the contrary, they should be protected.
watch the video
I believe you.
showing a woman being beaten in her ribs, and then they don't find the perpetrator. Who is he or where is he?
Most likely you're talking about the so-called unauthorized
Yes.
protests. Well, there you have it. Get permission, go and express your opinion. After all, you see, the internet, the mass media, including the opposition media, they will come wherever you are. Just anywhere you are, wherever you go. Wherever you gather to express your discontent with the ruling authorities, since millions of people will be informed about it via the internet and mass media, right?
Yes.
Why block traffic? In order to incite security forces into swinging their nightsticks. And then you'd ask me about it. That is the point, and nothing more. To display what kind of heroes they are, and that they will protect the interests of citizens with the same zeal if they get into power and engage in governing. It is not enough to just blame the authorities in order to convince the electorate that those who do the blaming are exactly the people they need. It is necessary to provide a positive program.
A pike lives in the lake to keep all fish awake.
Right. That is good, but not enough to effectively develop the country.
Why aren't you asking me about what I am holding in my hand?
Well, it is an iPad, I assume.
Or we decided to check the most popular search queries
Okay.
for Putin. What topics do you think our public is interested in?
I do not know.
Take a look.
Okay.
We can read it out loud.
Okay. Putin biography, Putin Instagram, Putin Georgia, Putin News Conference 2019, Putin Young, Putin Poland, Putin Family and Friends, Putin Age, Putin Fired Generals Today, Putin Nord Stream, Putin Zelensky, Putin Lookalike Proof.
I like the last one. Putin look-alike proof. Are you the real Putin?
Yes.
Do you have a double?
No.
Never had one?
No.
Has that topic ever popped up?
Yes.
And?
I discarded the idea of any doubles. This was during the toughest time of our war against terrorism.
At the beginning of the 2000s.
Yes.
So that a double would go to places where it was dangerous.
Well, he would go there, be seen.
So no double.
No.
Alright, let us switch to another topic. Digitalization and artificial intelligence. Why is everybody dreaming of going to Silicon Valley instead of Skolkovo?
Firstly, not everybody. The brain drain is on the decline. And in general,
I can't tell you what it's like.
okay, I do not doubt that it still exists, because people are like fish. Fish like the bottom deeper and flatter. Man also looks for what is better,
What
as
about
a
the
well-known
state?
saying goes. I will tell you about the state too. But a skilled workforce, or let us put it differently, top-notch professionals look for better places to employ their knowledge, capabilities, and skills. Wherever the pay is better, that is where they go. It's as simple as that. So, the state should create conditions to attract top-ranked professionals. There are two ways of doing this. Either we isolate ourselves the way it was done in...
You mean keep them from leaving?
Grab hold of them and don't let them out. Saddle them with some extra liabilities. For instance, someone who's received a higher education cannot leave the country. That individual will have to work here, must either do this or that, or reimburse for the cost of his tuition, and so on and so forth. This is what has been proposed for the healthcare sector, or a labor market.
For oneself?
In general, if a person studied at the government's expense, he has to either stay here and work, or refund the tuition costs. This is one of the ideas.
And what do you think about it?
By and large, this is a possible option. It is possible. If a person studies...
Sort of serve them.
Why? If you pay for your tuition yourself, you have the right to go anywhere and work wherever you please. But if you study at the government's expense, especially if your region pays for your tuition, hoping that you'll come back,
I agree.
Then it is quite fair. If you do not want to work there, or if you are unable to comply with the terms of the contract, then you are expected to refund the tuition costs. That's quite fair. The other option is to create conditions to pay better. As you know, it just seems easy. Civil aviation began to pay decent salaries because it needed foreign experts, and this resulted in a labor market imbalance. It affected military pilots who eagerly began to leave the armed forces, flocking to work as co-pilots on civilian airlines. The same is happening here. So, we should think over this matter. There is a need to raise salaries, but how can we do this? One option is through grants. We have just developed a vast system of grants. It encompasses not only the IT segment, but also the high-tech industry in general, and it works well. I guess you have some statistics ready on how many people are leaving, but take a look at how many people are coming in. There is an influx now.
The number of people leaving every year is exactly the same as the number of those employed at mail.ru.
Maybe, but mail.ru keeps making progress as well, you see? Yandex
So
is trying
it's
too.
an annual
Listen,
rotation.
Yandex is developing as well. They did not exist in the past, but now they do. And they compete well with major global companies, including Google. This proves there is progress. It is impossible to keep them all here. Or maybe we should not train as many people. It is a lose-lose situation. There are also people who return, and their number is not as meager as you may think. I met them, the recipients of the so-called mega grants and ordinary grants. They are very interesting people with good professional experience both in our country and abroad. Many of them have a strong desire to return, and we are bringing many of them back. We are creating conditions for them and setting up laboratories, along with offering them special salary packages. You know what I found quite interesting and what made me happy? Not only do they want to work themselves, but they also want to bring on board our young people and postgraduates and form research, development and production groups with them. And they are doing rather well. They are making progress in different areas: genetics, biology, digital technologies, artificial intelligence and robotics.
In other words, it's not something like just let them leave and another generation will arise.
No, nothing like that. That is not our approach, but it is a long and complicated process.
And how do you generally feel about the innovations of the last 20 years? I mean, electric cars, iPhones, smartphones, and the like.
Technological progress cannot be stopped, nor should it be. We have no plans to do it.
Do you feel comfortable with that? Do you use it?
I feel comfortable because I do not use any of these devices. I simply have other opportunities.
I saw you calling my namesake, the boy who was skiing at the Krasnaya Polana resort at your invitation. You were using a smartphone.
Well, indeed, I do call.
I didn't catch the model. You were holding it in a way.
Your friend Peskov gave it to me so that I could make a call. In all other situations, it is much easier for me to use a dedicated secure line to be connected to any number.
The army.
Okay, and?
The armor is strong and our tanks are fast, right?
Sure, As ok unvei, and our tanks are fast.
Who are we going to fight against?
We are not going to fight against anyone. We are going to create conditions so that nobody wants to fight against us, so that such an idea hits nobody.
There is a notion of reasonable adequacy.
Yes, there is. That's what we adhere to. Today, we rank 7th as far as military spending goes. The US has outstripped us. Donald told me they have approved a huge budget for next year. 738 billion, I think.
Did he brag?
No, he said this with regret. He said the costs were too high, but he had to do it. He actually advocated disarmament, as he said.
Why then won't he sign all those treaties?
That is another question. This is a question of how one understands security and how to ensure it. We can discuss this topic.
With him or with me?
I can discuss it both with him and with you. Doesn't matter. I'm well versed on this issue. I can discuss it with anyone. I think this is actually a mistake. The New START should be extended. But this is another issue. So, the US is ranked first in terms of spending, while China comes in second. Saudi Arabia, strangely enough, is ranked third. Then comes Great Britain, France, and Japan. Japan has surpassed us, as we come in 7th. Moreover, our spending is falling each and every year. In contrast, other countries' military spending has been rising. And we are not going to fight against anybody, but we are creating such a situation in the defense sector so that nobody even dares to think about fighting us. And now there is a unique situation. I have recently spoken about it at the Defense Ministry. This is the first time in modern Russia. We always had to catch up with our, figuratively speaking, competitors. The first atomic bomb was created by the Americans. We caught up with them. Then, the first major strategic aircraft to deliver these weapons was also made by the Americans. We caught up to them again. The first missiles were developed by the Americans. Still, we caught up. For the first time, we have created such offense strike systems which the world has never seen. Now, they are trying to catch up with us. This is a unique situation. This has never happened before. I mean, first of all, hypersonic offensive systems, including intercontinental ones. In 2000, slightly over 1.3 million people served in our army. Now, a little more than 1 million. We increased the share of modern equipment by just 1% a year back then. The share of modern equipment was only 6%. And now, do you know how much? Do you? Almost 70.
It's just like Chekhov's principle. If there is a hypersonic rifle hanging on the wall, in the 2nd or 3rd chapter, it will unquestionably go off.
That may be true for the theater. Security and political reality are governed by another rule. Do you know which one? It will go off if it is hanging just on one stage. And if a similar rifle is hanging on a stage close by, it is unlikely that anyone near it would want to use it. This is exactly the situation that is called strategic stability and the balance of power. Due to this strategic balance, the world has avoided major military conflicts after World War II. Precisely thanks to this strategic stability and strategic balance. By the way, while developing their anti-ballistic missile system, the Americans wanted to upset this strategic stability and balance, thinking that if they created a missile defense umbrella, the other side wouldn't be able to respond adequately if they used nuclear weapons. However, after having developed these modern systems, including those which easily evade any anti-missile ballistic system, we maintain the strategic stability and strategic balance. It is essential not only for us, but for global security.
Civil society.
Why did you sigh so heavily?
Because the next question will be, why do the authorities prefer to communicate with the active part of society by using nightsticks?
That is not true. The most active part of society is not just the so-called non-systemic opposition that breaks existing laws. Why do you reduce the active part of society like that? The active part of society is also about volunteers, and we have millions of them. They too represent the active part of society. Young, capable, active people working in all different areas: education, healthcare, environmental protection. They actively help others, and this is great. You know, I sometimes look at them in awe, almost with tears in my eyes. because these people really do a great job. There has always been and always will be a certain part of society in any country that disagrees with the authorities in power, and it is very good that such people exist. By the way, please note that if some revolutionary events occur, as a rule, those people who masterminded these events don't stay in power for long. Very quickly, they become uncomfortable with the authority their teeming activity has created. The Bolsheviks were perhaps the sole exception, as they remained in power after the October coup d'etat for rather a long time. But then the whole Bolshevik thing fell apart and dragged the country along. But as far as this so-called non-systemic opposition is concerned, God bless them. I feel we need it. After all, you do understand this is not my first day on the job. I believe we need them very much. I can see that they have a real influence on specific life, especially at the level of municipalities, major cities, and so on.
Why are they clamped down on them?
I will tell you why. Because there are rules for everyone to follow. For those who like the authorities and for those who don't alike. There is law, and it should be observed. Otherwise, we will find ourselves in a situation when the country is totally disbalanced. Do you want cars to be burnt in our streets?
When was it that cars were burnt in the streets? The last time it happened was after the defeat of our national team in Japan.
If there is no response, they will be burnt. Shop windows will be smashed to pieces and people will be harmed. You want to express your viewpoint, your opinion, and you want to do it through public protest. You are welcome to do so. The law permits it. Get permission and go ahead. In some countries, in almost every country, even in European ones, unauthorized protests are punishable by incarceration. The prison terms are not very long, from 6 to 12 months. But in some countries, unauthorized protests involving 12 people, I think somewhere in Sweden, they are considered civil unrest. Those can get you 5 or 10 years behind bars. We don't have that, you see.
Well, 3 years?
3 is less than 10.
That's still quite a bit.
Quite a bit, so do not break the law.
That's a separate topic. We can discuss it for a long time. A request was filed, but not approved. Then protesters took to the streets, meant nothing bad, and so on. Then you will never make heads or tails of who hit whom, who stole whose fur coat.
That's not important who or whose. Seek to obtain such permission. It's the same procedure abroad too. They too need permission and get it. No permission, no protest. No permission, but nevertheless you go ahead with the protest. Be ready to get shaved.
Okay.
To take a rest, relax a little.
You mean crop cuts?
Of course, what else?
For 3 years or 5?
As the court rules.
Caught again? And the foreign agent status?
What about the foreign agent status? We were not the ones to invent it. Did we come up with the foreign agent status? Since 1938 or 1937, I think since 1938, this law has been in effect in the USA. They still use it.
Why does it matter? I beg your pardon, but in certain countries, Jews were forced to wear yellow stars on their clothes. So, what difference does it make who invented what?
What do yellow stars have to do with any of this?
It's a mark.
And the Holocaust? No, there is a big difference. The United States of America is not Nazi Germany, and it should not be blamed.
I drew a parallel.
For what it is not responsible at all. It was a bad parallel, unfair, and having nothing to do with reality.
Meaning we stand up for America?
I stood up for America. In this case, yes, I did it. But they invented this law and have been actively using it, including a very recent case. Our citizen, a woman, she later became quite famous, was jailed as a foreign agent. Excuse me, but she was facing a 12-year sentence there, right? So what? They use it. We have no such thing. We only have an administrative penalty for this. And what is the purpose of that law? It exists simply to protect Russia from external meddling in its politics. There is no other purpose. While some countries prohibit the activity of such organizations, we don't ban it. They are free to keep working. By the way, this practice is a well-established one. They continue to work. However, they are required to report if they receive funding from abroad and are engaged in internal political activity. Nobody's rights are being infringed on here whatsoever. There is nothing that runs counter to international practice. Some may be reluctant to say, yes, I'm involved in domestic political affairs, and I'm doing that with the money I get from a foreign source, with foreign money. But that's not fair. They'd better admit it and continue their activity. So the question is different, and there is a question. And I believe that human rights activists are right in drawing my attention to this. We need to have a very clear idea of what internal political activity is. We need to ensure that there are no misconceptions. And we need to ensure that no other activity involving humanitarian matters, for instance, public health or environmental protection, is used as a disguise to engage in domestic political affairs.
So foreign agents exist only in politics?
Absolutely. This is only about domestic political activity and the funding of that activity from foreign sources.
Stability or stagnation? How does economic stability differ from stagnation?
This is very simple. Economic stability is the foundation for development. Overall, stability is always the foundation for development, while stagnation is basically backpedaling without any development. That's the main difference.
Look, during the first decade of your tenure, everything was booming.
Yes.
Then, around 2008, we set off on bolstering our health by jogging in place.
Well, firstly, it is very healthy. I will get to that. It is important. Secondly, the question is about the benchmark we started from in 1999 and 2000. It was minimal, in fact, a pittance. Because then, if we begin with the key issue here, 42 million people lived below the poverty line, a third of the country's population. Nowadays, this number is still high at 13.5 million, but it's not a third, not 42 million. Nevertheless, it's still a lot, and we must combat this. Back then, the gold and forex reserves stood at 12.5 billion, and the national debt came to 145 billion. There was no end in sight. It was unclear how to sort it out. Since then until now, as I say this, people may start having doubts, but this is a fact. Real wages have grown by 4.2%, pensions have almost tripled 2.9 times, real incomes have jumped 2.4 times.
Do you mean since 2000?
Yes, since 2000. Those are definitely real things. Now, this does not mean that everything is fine today. Not at all, on the contrary. Moreover, people do not make comparisons with what it was like before, when it was bad, but rather how good it is supposed to be in the future. When they see that their desires are not met, they feel let down. Frankly speaking, I agree with this perspective.
Especially since you made a promise. In 2008, we heard that by 2020, the average wage would be around $2,700. A family of 3 would have a 100 square meter flat.
Well, this is not quite correct. Those were preliminary plans.
Yes, plans. The so-called 2020 concept.
We planned to double our GDP by 2008, and based on this, we compiled our social plans accordingly. In 2008, we had practically reached our goals. Then the global financial crisis struck. Not by any fault of ours. It came from beyond our borders. As a result, a far more urgent task appeared that we had to tackle. I want to remind everybody that here, it was essential to prevent the economy from collapsing and the public savings from being wiped out. This was in 2008. I became Prime Minister then and had to publicly announce, this was a huge risk, frankly speaking. I announced that...
The risk was you being Prime Minister?
No, that's not what I said. What I said was this. I stated that I would prevent a repeat of the 1998 crisis when all the public savings had been wiped out. And we prevented that. But indeed it had a negative impact on our development. Honestly, we were not to blame for it. That global financial meltdown and the economic crisis that followed came from the outside.
I see, but incomes, real incomes, have been on the decline in recent years.
True, we are concerned about this. I'm deeply concerned that this sort of stagnation has hit real incomes. There is an explanation. First and foremost, it is connected with a drastic drop in energy prices. Everything kept growing as long as oil was at $100 per barrel or higher. Now it's $60. Do you see the difference? It is practically halved. This explains why we launched these national projects with the aim of changing the economy's structure and promoting self-sustaining development. But people can hardly afford to wait for years. I understand this perfectly. I certainly understand that this is one of today's key social issues. We need to do something about this. The government is obliged to do something to give it a boost. There are many ways.
Does anyone bear personal responsibility for the falling revenues and the rise in poverty? The latest figures show that the number has been on the rebound.
Well, there were 13.4 million, now there are 13.5 million. The difference is not very big, but it does exist. These are real people. What can we say about personal responsibility at a time when the world oil prices have slumped? What can we say about personal responsibility if...
But we wanted to wean ourselves off oil dependency.
We wanted to do that, and we are gradually doing it, by the way. We are really moving away from it because the share of non-oil and gas revenue is growing. But this requires time, and it cannot be done at the drop of a hat.
There's been a lot of talk about inflation. It's reducing, but people are more concerned about what they see in their refrigerators.
True.
Macroeconomic figures may look good, but...
Try to see my point. Low inflation means that prices go up very slowly, or do not grow at all.
But they do go up.
But slowly. Since the 2000s that you started from.
You did.
Well, the 20 questions, that is where you started.
Well, yes.
We had an inflation rate of 20.5%, I believe. And in 1999, when I became Prime Minister, it was 36% or 35%, I believe. And in 1992, inflation was 2,600%. Now it is hovering around 3.4 to 3.5%. And that covers food prices. And people feel the bite of rising inflation since prices go up, taking a toll on people's wallets. It's another thing that, along with targeting inflation, the public's disposable income needs to be raised. This is obvious. It is quite obvious. In the context of our economic structure, it is not that simple. But the government is certainly obliged to make additional efforts. This is precisely what we are discussing.
All paths are open to our young people, one would like to believe.
I hope so.
Have you heard this meme? How do you like it, Elon Musk?
No, I have not.
But have you heard about Elon Musk?
Yes, of course.
He's launching a Tesla, while Rogozin is creating an elevator to the moon.
An elevator to the moon? And so?
They are in different leagues.
I can give you different examples. A group of young people from a graduating class showed up. This whole group of people came...
Where?
To one of our institutes and created the Iskander. This group of people from a graduating class showed up, and in a few years they created the Iskander, one of our cutting-edge weapons that we are proud of. The best in the world. Young people showed up and created the Peresviet. This is an example from our defense industry. But they did it.
So let them create a Tesla-like passenger car.
Prokhorov said he would make...
An airplane.
He did not succeed
yes,
yet.
the Yo-mobile.
He promised. He showed it to me. I even went for a ride in it. But it has not been working for him so far. In the high-tech field and in the nuclear sphere, we have been making great strides. We have outperformed everyone. We are the world's largest manufacturer of nuclear units for power plants. Not weapons, mind you. This is state-of-the-art technology. It is developing very rapidly. If we look at military equipment, say military aviation, we are really on top here. We will continue moving forward in the civilian sector as well. We already have our own pharmaceutical products, very good ones, and so on. Gradually, it's gaining momentum.
I meant something different.
What?
When I mentioned Musk, he's not exactly an idol, but some sort of a role model.
Fine, but
Whom can we offer as an alternative? Not an American.
we have Kaspersky. I believe he is really good at what he does. He is a leader without a doubt. If the screws had not been tightened, if competition had not been artificially stifled, it would have been much better. This is what comes to mind right away.
How do you feel about the fact that according to one of the opinion polls, half of the young people want to leave the country?
There are all sorts of opinion polls, and target groups can also differ. Some want to leave, others want to return. As I've already said, the latter's numbers are on the rise. Certainly, if we want our people to fulfill their ambitions in their own country, the state must boost its efforts to ensure this, and we will do so. I think that the number of good specialists is steadily growing, and the fact that our specialists find employment in the global labor market means that we provide a good higher education.
Does the leaders of Russia contest live up to your expectations?
Yes, of course. They are really great guys. However, not only do we have the Leaders of Russia contest, there is also Russia Land of Opportunity, with a whole set of mechanisms that seem to be working very efficiently.
And what do you think the criterion is? Is it the number of public appointees or the number of proposals coming from?
Among the contests I mentioned, we do not have a single contest for a specific job or office. We simply allow people to expand their knowledge and capabilities even more. Yet simultaneously, when working with these people, representatives of major corporations or ministries and agencies pick out future employees. Actually, by doing so, we have already found ministers, deputy ministers, and even governors and deputy governors. This is a very good social elevator.
The Sirius project also represents such a new experience. I mean the Sirius Center.
Sirius is a little different.
Of course, it applies to young people, I mean.
Absolutely, but this is a method of working with gifted children. We have never had... well, we did.
In Soviet times?
Yes, we did. Actually, when I was deciding to create Sirius, By the way, do you know how this idea emerged?
No, I don't.
Olympic facilities in the Imereti Valley. Suggestions immediately started coming in to dismantle something and relocate it somewhere. But dismantling and relocating would cost us about the same as constructing something new. It would be better to change the location, and finally I decided to build something new in some other place. But how do we make use of what is available? At first, a simple, even primitive thought entered my mind: to use these facilities for children's sports. But later I thought, why just for sports? We inherited a system of advanced education and training from the USSR. I mean physics and mathematics schools, biology schools, then music colleges at conservatories, ballet schools. We are proud of all this. And of course sports, that is figure skating and hockey, our prestigious sports where we have good capabilities and where we have been successful. So I came up with the idea of putting this all together.
Do you mean the original idea was yours?
Yes, I came up with it. A colleague of mine who was invited there said to one of his colleagues, he is not going to succeed. When asked why, he said, to begin with, your hockey players will beat up the math whiz kids. Yet nothing of this kind has occurred there. Because kids, even powerful athletic lads, respect their peers who achieve noticeable success in their fields because they know that this requires great effort and talent. So, Sirius, by the way, I was the one who came up with the name as well. I was sitting and thinking about a name, and suddenly I recalled that the brightest star in the sky is Sirius. It brings together the brightest kids. That is why I proposed the name, and the name stuck.
It couldn't have been otherwise.
But why?
Putin said so.
Anything can happen. Here we use a system of selecting gifted kids established back in the Soviet Union. I mean these physics and mathematics schools, biology schools, music schools, and so on. From these schools, every 21 days we pick a group of kids for Sirius and arrange 21-day training courses for them. Then we pick out those with the best potential. It turned out to be a very good idea. Moreover, do you know what is interesting and what I especially like about this? Here we see athletes communicating with math geniuses, while math geniuses may go to see a hockey match or ballet performance for the first time. Thus they get involved in physical fitness. This is really great. I like this very much. The next step should be to create a modern university. We have already set up a scientific cluster of laboratories there specializing in such priority fields. There are several of them, 4 I believe. Then we intend to create a technology park there, consisting of a school, a university and a scientific laboratory, and the technopark where innovations can materialize. We will link the whole process.
The 75th anniversary. Do you believe that it is fundamentally important that all leaders come?
Not at all. It is our holiday. But I think that for our former allies in the anti-Hitler coalition, the right thing to do would be to come here, from both a domestic policy stance and a moral one. We look forward to seeing them, and we will be glad if they come. If not, well, that is their choice. But I think it would be a mistake for them.
Do you get the feeling that they want to deprive us of this victory?
No, I do not. That is impossible. It would go against common sense. You see, there are some ignorant people who cannot even read or write. They spout all kinds of garbage in the European Parliament about equal responsibility of Hitler and Stalin. Complete nonsense. You have to look at the chain of events starting around 1918, 1919, and what was going on then, who signed what with Hitler. Incidentally, Stalin, regardless of what anyone thinks of him, that he was a tyrant or whatever, never disgraced himself by having direct face-to-face contact with Hitler. What is more, not a single document was ever signed by both Stalin and Hitler. In contrast, there are documents signed by both Hitler and the British Prime Minister, Hitler and the Prime Minister of France, and also by both Hitler and the leader of Poland. And they worked with him, with Hitler, held numerous meetings with him, and betrayed Czechoslovakia. Poland carved up Czechoslovakia with Hitler. In fact, they agreed on invading Czechoslovakia. The only thing that Hitler told them was, do not do it on the same day as us. Let us not get in each other's way. We do not want what you are after, the Tessin region. This was outright collusion. Just read it. Everything is in the documents. I dug them up from the archives. I looked through them and read them.
Yes, we read and heard about it.
Of course, everything is in there. And after that, they tell us who is to blame? They are the ones who are guilty starting from 1938. It was precisely the Munich betrayal that was the first step to ignite World War II.
Poland places the Soviet Union on the same footing as Warsaw officially equates the Soviet Union to Hitler's Germany, equally blaming both sides and accusing both countries of unleashing World War II, and we immediately reach for our boxing gloves.
We are not doing that. We have condemned the Molotov-Ribbentrop secret protocol. Russia has done that. In turn, other countries could also honestly say how they feel about the way their leadership acted back then. Let them honestly open up about it, instead of hurling some fictitious, absolutely baseless accusations and allegations.
You're talking about the past while I'm focusing on today. Look.
No.
Polish leaders did not invite you to
This
the
is not a big deal.
75th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz. However, Zelensky attended the event and was talking about the 1st Ukrainian Front, the 100th Lvov Division.
We all know this is nonsense. We know that this is about today's political landscape. But what about the millions of Ukrainians who fought against Hitler and against Nazism? To them, this is a slap in the face. I assure you, they are just as afraid to open their mouth because they know they will immediately be subjected to intimidation. I know how people feel in their hearts. Those who took up arms to battle Nazism, this is a slap in the face to them. But Ukraine's incumbent president wants to look good in the eyes of Poland's current government, and in my opinion, this is a terrible mistake.
And what do you think of slogans like, "We can do it again," in the run-up to May 9th?
What slogans?
You know, the ones usually seen on the back of the BMW or a Mercedes on May 9th? "We can do it again," "To Berlin," "Thank you, Grandpa, for the victory."
Thank you, Grandpa, for victory is a good one.
What about "We can do it again"?
You know what? It could be interpreted in many ways. The Soviet Union was subjected to a dreadful, horrible, unforgivable attack by Nazi Germany. We lost 27 million people. No other country in the world sustained such an enormous loss. Therefore, if anyone ever dares to try anything like that again, we can do it again.
Well, it wouldn't be better if we never had to.
Of course. We never wanted it and never will. Accordingly, the Russian leadership has never looked at this issue from that angle. Therefore, if we consider the slogan you mentioned from this perspective, it is enough to recall the words of Alexander Nevsky: "Whosoever comes with a sword will fall by the sword."
So you address Trump as Donald, in a friendly way.
He calls me Vladimir, I call him Donald.
I mean, you have worked with 4 American presidents. Once Bush saw something in your eyes.
Yes.
But things did not go well with Obama, is that correct?
Well,
Who was it that you felt most at ease with?
it is difficult for me to say now. Indeed, I had fairly constructive relations with each of them.
But it didn't go well with Obama.
Did or didn't. I had good relations with Bush.
Did somebody put you at odds with him?
What?
Did somebody put you at odds with him?
No, it has nothing to do with being at odds. It's just that when a person says that...
Do you mean Barack?
Sorry?
Do you mean Barack?
Yes. He already stated that the US is an exceptional nation with special, exclusive rights to practically the entire world. I cannot go along with that. God created us all equal and gave us equal rights. So I think it's absolutely ungrounded to say that some people should have exclusive rights to anything.
On a scale from 1 to 5, not to make it too complicated, how would you rate Russia's current relationship with the US?
I would give it a 3.
Ну, где-то на троечку.
A 3? Not bad.
Between 2 and 3. More like a 3 though. Look.
And how about earlier?
Look, we do cooperate on counterterrorism. I'm serious. It was actually me who called Trump to thank the US for giving us the information.
You mean on the St. Petersburg cell?
Yes, they had been looking into them for a long time. And after that, the FBI provided this information to the Federal Security Service.
Does it mean that the Americans are working better than us on our own soil?
They work. I'm not going to talk about it now, because this information is classified. They work globally.
I won't tell anyone.
I'll whisper it in your ear afterwards.
Okay.
They work globally, and so do we.
Okay.
But they were the ones who tracked this case down. That time we did not. Our services tracked down a lot of them, thus preventing dozens of terrorist attacks. They catch and intercept them, several dozen a year. That specific case was detected by the US. I would like to thank them a lot for sharing that information with us.
So it's a 3 now. But what was the peak rate?
Well, let's see. Trade turnover used to be higher. It dropped to 20 from 28, still very low. But in the last 2 years, under Trump, trade turnover started to grow. In terms of security, a while ago we concluded an agreement with Obama. The New START was also signed when he was in office. Now it has not been extended, just yet. So this raises a question. The US keeps imposing sanctions on Russia. Another question, take Nord Stream 2. They impose sanctions on this as well. The US has always been against the development of our economic relations with Europe, even in the 1960s when we launched the construction, you remember, the gas for pipes deal. Thank God now we produce large diameter pipes ourselves, which by the way is another recent achievement of our white metallurgy and other sectors. 75%, and this is crucial, 75% of facilities in our manufacturing sector, as well as machinery and equipment, have been manufactured in recent years, in the last 10 to 15 years. This is quite an achievement. They have always been against it. Against Nord Stream 1, they did oppose it. Now they oppose Nord Stream 2 in the same manner. So why did they do it? What for? What was the reason? To ensure transit through Ukraine. Looks a bit strange too, doesn't it? So they are wooing Ukraine and have introduced external control over it. But they want Ukraine to be sustained by our money as well. They don't want to give Ukraine money themselves. They want Ukraine to receive something from us through transit fees. Okay, we agree, because following from the growth of gas consumption in Europe in general, and in Ukraine in particular, we too will be interested in it, and we will go on with gas transit. The volumes will be lower, but we will continue. However, the main motivation, the excuse for imposing sanctions against Nord Stream 2, was the need to ensure transit through Ukraine. We have signed a transit agreement with Ukraine. So, what is needed now? Sanctions against Nord Stream should be lifted. There are no grounds for imposing them. And if the sanctions remain, it will mean that there is only one motive: to ensure competitive advantages for their LNG, for their liquefied gas.
The strongest player sets the rules.
They are securing a market for their products exclusively in their own selfish interests and at the expense of European consumers. But if the price of a fossil fuel rises by 25 to 30%, the competitiveness of the German economy as well as the European one will be undermined.
But in fact, in geopolitical terms, Europe from Lisbon to Vladivostok does not exist anymore.
But it never existed. Anymore. You're talking now about something which never existed, as if it's something we have lost. Back in the day, de Gaulle spoke about a Europe from the Atlantic to the Urals. Then I extended that idea a little and started saying, why to the Urals? Why not to the Pacific, to the Far East? But I think we should aim for it.
Was your Munich speech an overreaction?
Not at all. Now they repeat everything I said. For example, the German leaders. They almost repeated word for word. They were mad at me at the time, angry with me. They said, why did you do that?
They took offense.
No, got angry. Because, well, it was a bit rude at the wrong time. Why would you do that? And what did I say? I said that it is inadmissible that one country, the United States, extends its jurisdiction beyond its national borders. Today, say the German leadership says exactly that it is inadmissible that the United States imposes secondary sanctions, i.e. on companies that have no relations to the United States, trying to prevent them from pursuing their national interests.
Not only distant, but also our close neighbors started to distance themselves from us in a way.
Well, I don't see that. Who exactly started to distance themselves?
Take Georgia, for instance.
They didn't just distance themselves, they jumped aside. Through no fault of ours. They should thank Mikhail Nikolaevich Saakashvili for that.
But he hasn't been around for a long time.
Not at all. He is running around from square to square, taking to rooftops like a tomcat. We had a lot of discussions with him on the subject when he was still president. I think Mikhail Saakashvili would recall that. I told him, listen, don't you ever try to deal with South Ossetia and Abkhazia using force. No, I'll never do that, he said. And he still stormed in. He stormed in and got knocked back.
Business could extend a helping hand.
What do you mean?
If it's more actively involved in the country's affairs, if there is investment, the economy will begin to grow.
I can crack down on business right away and tell them they act irresponsibly. This is not the case. Russian business in general has changed a great deal over the past 10 years at least. The government has to create conditions for investment. This is for sure. To create better conditions involving controlling inflation. We have been doing certain things in this respect. In the World Bank's Doing Business ranking, we are in the 28th place, I think. We have moved up by one order more, massively more. This indicates that the government has been stepping up its efforts in this area, which are yielding positive results. And the amount of investment is growing. In dollar terms, our investment in the beginning of the 2000s totaled around $1 billion. Then there were tens of billions. Now direct investment exceeds $540 billion.
You know, it looks like you see businessmen as swindlers by definition.
Well, you know.
There are certain
grounds for this, you see. I'm saying this with particular emphasis. What grounds are there? Firstly, the so-called small business throughout the 2000s was associated with trade, almost entirely.
Not only in Russia.
No, I disagree. In many so-called developed market economies, small business plays a very big role. There are 20...
In the services sector, right?
And not only there. In manufacturing too. We have been trying to achieve what is already a reality in developed market economies. Namely, large companies have dozens or even hundreds of small businesses working close to them and serving the interests of those large companies. What are we doing now? In fact, we are forcing our large companies, in particular those that are partially state-owned, to conclude contracts with small businesses. We are talking about trillions here already. And it really worked. This really worked. The structure of our small businesses has begun to change. Now it's no longer just retail trade like kiosks or pavilions. It's not only about buying low and selling high. Now there are research business ventures too. And small businesses in manufacturing, high-tech small businesses. And they are rather effective. The export of these services and goods is growing too. This is what makes me think we are moving in the right direction in principle, although progress is still, unfortunately, too slow.
Did I understand correctly that retailer is equal to swindler?
In people's minds, that's what we say.
But I'm talking about you.
I'm part of the same people, you know.
I see.
So, honestly speaking, to be really honest, we all think so. But
Have you ever been swindled? Cheated?
Me?
You.
Well, of course. You yourself have surely been swindled and cheated too.
And what happened to those who did it?
Nothing. You know, there was not much you could do during Soviet times. You got swindled, cheated, and just lived with it.
But what if you caught them on the spot?
Well, you know, first of all, it's not like I got cheated every day. But if I happened to notice it, there never was anything too serious, and I preferred not to lock horns. Making a scene is not a good idea, just isn't worth it.
Leaving small business aside, although it's obviously going through hard times too. Now there is this regulatory guillotine.
Yes, starting from January the 1st, 2021.
How much time is left? Still a whole year. How many will survive till then and how many won't?
You see, Andrei, hitting the target is what it's all about. It is a very tricky thing. What is a regulatory guillotine? Take the very same retail trade, for instance, especially the food retail sector or some other sectors that concern people's lives. You could cancel everything to the point where hospitals would be working around the clock to accommodate patients with food poisonings. We should be very cautious about this. The same applies to medicines and so on and so forth. Take fire safety. I know that the fire services are criticized a lot, but there are safety matters involved. Whenever a major tragedy occurs, we instantly begin to tighten the screws everywhere. In the meantime, it's not about tightening or loosening rules. What we need is optimal fire safety requirements. The same goes for everything else. Therefore, cancelling everything at once is very dangerous. But leaving everything unchanged is no longer possible either. That is why, during these 18 months and during the year, the government will be working hard on this issue.
What about big business, investment, foreign investment? Who will agree to take risks at a time when memories are still fresh? It all began with Khodorkovsky, then there was Magnitsky, and now we have Calvi.
Khodorkovsky is a fraudster, and their company was involved not just in fraudulent transactions, but in murders. This is the real problem. They were convicted in accordance with Russian law. Khodorkovsky's personal involvement in contract murders was not proven, but the killings did take place. They were proven, including killings by their security service. Do you think that staffers of the corporate security service were killing people at their own initiative, of their own volition? I don't think so. I don't think it works that way. However, if it's not proven, then it's not proven. But his other legal activities were proven, hence his prison sentence. As for Calvi, the law enforcement agencies and the court are looking into this matter. Law enforcement agencies in the first place.
Well, that's a classic response.
There can be no other response, because I cannot say if he's guilty or not until there is a well-founded...
Well, the West is watching. Why get involved?
Good for them. We should focus on what we are doing ourselves, paying no attention to the West or the East. We are paddling our own canoe, and we need to proceed from our country's legislation and the supremacy of Russian law.
How much money has flowed out of the country over this period of time?
Not very much.
Not very much?
If we bear in mind how much money has flowed into the country, it can be calculated. The outflow of capital does exist. It is quite evident, but the picture varies from year to year. Generally speaking, it is a natural process, capital inflow and outflow. The more stable our rules of the game are, the more reliable the protection of investment and property is, the more comfortable people who invest will feel.
State capitalism.
Yes.
What is it that makes today's business titans better than the oligarchs of the 90s? The mere fact that you know them and trust them.
I have known both. The difference is,
You were not president then.
I was Prime Minister then, and I became President in 2000.
Yes.
I knew them all,
And
I worked with all of them.
The
point is not to crack down on some,
but that is what happened.
or twist their arms or any other body parts. Absolutely not. Do you know what really matters? It is keeping them away from running the country, from influencing political decisions. It is clear that both then and now, everybody was and is looking to make moves and lobby their own interests. The difference between the 1990s or 2000s and today is that they used to directly influence the decisions made by the state on internal, economic, and even foreign policy matters as well as security issues. A modern CEO does not enjoy this privilege.
But do they try to?
Not anymore, actually. They have realized that it is impossible and do not even bother trying.
Did you make that clear?
They are struggling to protect their interests. For instance, we are currently discussing oil and gas prices with our Eurasian Economic Union partners. Of course, they stand their ground. That is understandable. But they are not trying to exert pressure from the inside. They simply clarify their position, providing arguments to prove they are right. But this refers to a very limited segment of their practical interests. This is natural.
And what about all these active state intervention in the economic sphere over the recent years? Look at all these state corporations established in those years of affluence. In the second half of the 2000s, when there was windfall cash that could be put to use.
This is not true. There are different assessments regarding the state's involvement in the economy. They vary. Some believe that the state's intervention in the economy is excessive. Others believe it is normal. Different methodologies lead to discrepant results.
So how do you see it?
I believe that overall we have managed to find the balance. If I'm not mistaken, only 7 or 8 out of our 20 biggest companies are partially state-owned. Is it 7 or 8 out of the 20 biggest companies? I may be off by a notch, which is no big deal, I think. The question is not whether they are private or public. The question is how they operate. If they are effective, profitable, and generate public revenue, then the question is whether privatization is the overall goal at all. Take Canada, for instance. I remember talking to my Canadian counterpart. They had privatized their railway system. In the end, the Americans bought it. The Canadians have come to regret it. Here we need to be very careful and take calculated decisions. Besides, public-private companies are some of the major contributors to public budgets at all levels. Rosneft is number 1, followed by Gazprom and Lukoil. Then come Tatneft and Sberbank.
Lukoil is a private company.
Yes, that is what I'm telling you. The largest companies are the biggest taxpayers.
It is common belief, an axiom of sorts, that the government is not an effective owner.
This axiom is nothing. You have to look into the way a particular business operates. Applying a generalized approach here is as useless as calculating the average body temperature of patients in a hospital. As you know, this argument is often used when people start asking, quite reasonably, why is it that my neighbor and I are not doing well at all, while life in our country on the whole is fine? It is the same here, two sides of a coin. Therefore, while a generalized approach may be correct, as a methodology, we should consider each particular case separately.
In other words, you believe that reprivatization is not a bad thing.
Right. I do not think it is a bad thing. Well, you know, there are many
Your
different...
advisor, Yumashev, thinks differently.
Well, that is what advisors are for. Their job is to offer opinions. There are different approaches and different visions. A decision maker must consider every opinion. That is what I'm trying to do. Here is another problem. The central bank is being heavily criticized for having taken too many financial institutions under its control, for having spent too much money, for having paid large dividends to its shareholders, and so on and so forth. It was actually not to the shareholders that most of the payments went. The shareholders were hardly paid anything. The bank was paying citizens to minimize their losses from this or that institution's failure. In the long run, I know some people will get angry and say, I sustained damage. But the central bank's task was to prevent millions of people from sustaining this damage. prevent weak financial institutions from borrowing too much money from people, from the population, the way real estate developers dealt with defrauded home buyers, and then just vanish to reappear somewhere in London as usual. That is why we had to resort to resolution procedures at some point. Whether it was done well or badly is another question. The central bank took over the assets of these financial institutions, but not for good, and it is not going to keep them forever. They will be reorganized and reintroduced into the market. The central bank has a relevant plan, Ms. Nabulina briefs me.
Speaking of profits, how do you match a public corporation status and its top management's free market salaries?
They do not match well.
When they are paid
They do not, I agree with you.
1 million a day.
Listen, I find this outrageous myself, honestly.
Now, Mr. Putin,
I will reply, many things are not as simple as they might seem at first. I have already had a word with them on that score. What is their answer? They hire many foreign specialists who work effectively and are worth something on the market, on the international labor market, that is. They have to hire them and pay them a wage equivalent to the cost of their services on the international labor market. But if they are to be paid this amount, their bosses are entitled to be paid more. Do you know where else this happened? Civil aviation pilots. Precisely the same thing. We were forced to hire foreign pilots, in particular those with experience flying Boeings and European planes. We had to raise their pay to meet European and US standards. Now the military pilots eagerly take co-pilots' jobs because in the Air Force they are paid less than in civil aviation. This distorted the labor market, affecting the defense ministry. And we are seeing the same here.
now, Mr. Putin, how much are airplane pilots paid? $500,000 a month?
The second pilot gets something around 300,000, 350,000 rubles, I believe.
While a top manager gets $1 million a day, mind you, a day. Now this seems a little bit too much.
I do not know about the daily rate, but it does look a bit too much, I agree.
As far as foreign specialists are concerned, there is something... Well, it does not sound like the truth.
No.
I
Why?
hate to say. I mean, it is important, but
No. Otherwise they would be paid less than their subordinates are.
maybe they should be paid less then.
Does that happen anywhere? Should we be the exception? It does not work like that anywhere in the world.
Really? Fine then.
But, honestly speaking, I find this annoying and preposterous. I agree.
They have to be more modest.
Yes, that's true.
Fine then.
I fully agree with you.
Perfect. We've been hit with sanctions because of Ukraine.
To hell with those sanctions. According to various estimates, we have lost around 50 billion, but we have earned the same amount.
That's quite a bit.
Quite a bit, but it made us use our brains. We spent quite a lot of money on the so-called import substitution program and started to produce such items and technologies that we did not have before or simply forgot about them and lost them. We recreated all of this, and we are undoubtedly benefiting from it. It diversifies our economy. In fact, it helps us address our overriding priority.
But counter-sanctions give the impression that we were deliberately hurting ourselves.
Nonsense! Counter-sanctions helped us boost the agro-industry. They freed up our domestic market. In our country, if we look at the past years from 2000s and onwards, everyone here spoke about the agro-industry as if it was a black hole. Surely you do remember. Where is it now? I don't even remember how far ahead agricultural production has leaped. I think 2.6-fold. We have always been a grain importer, but now we are the world's top wheat exporter. We have even outperformed the United States, Canada, and Australia. They produce more, but also consume more. We supply more to the market. We started to produce enough to meet our basic food needs: dairy, poultry, pork, all staples. We need to work more on vegetables and beef. And we are doing it. Nobody could have imagined that our export was going to total $25 billion last year. This year it will be $24 billion, I think. Our arms sales are only $15 billion. Nobody would have ever thought that we would become such a major exporter, and we will increase this volume. In this sense, and from the point of view of developing high-tech productions, and in terms of agriculture development, import substitution, is it good or bad? On the one hand, it's good. It has served us well. Another thing is bad. It's bad that this distorts the entire global and European economic space. This is what's bad. Competition should be natural without any external restrictions. But the fact is, our partners also lose approximately the same. Europe has lost roughly the same according to their own estimates. They've been losing even more sensitive things.
But there are 40 countries in Europe, and we are one country.
You see, they are losing jobs. Right now, we have the lowest level of unemployment in history. In this sense, we lost nothing. And they are losing jobs because imports have nosedived as a result of a wide range of circumstances, including sanctions.
You actually gave the opposition a compliment by saying that we need the opposition, including the non-systemic one.
It is not a compliment. This is what I think. I mean it sincerely.
By and large, objectively speaking, our opposition, well, what we call the opposition, is tame.
No,
it's
that is not true.
hand-fed.
When-
Systemic. What we call systemic opposition.
Listen, we have 4 parliamentary parties. Quite often they have their own view of things. True, United Russia holds the majority in the State Duma. Some may say, it's a little bit boring.
Window dressing.
No, a little bit
A
boring.
decoration.
No, a little bit boring.
Boring.
Yes.
Pretty true.
Yes.
Honestly?
Yes.
A little bit boring.
I understand. Do you wish to jump for joy when they may be fighting there like they do in Ukraine or some other place?
Not the place for discussions, we remember.
No, it is the place for discussions. But it is not the place for brawls or internal skirmishes or for showing off.
Well, you sound somewhat too radical. Either a brawl or a swamp. What about taking some balanced position?
This is what I'm telling you. Listen to what Gennady Zyuganov said in his speech. What makes you say, oh? He has his own stance, and not only he, but other members of the Communist Party too.
He and Zhirinovsky were philosophizing back when you were working in Dresden.
It does not matter, it's not important.
In other words, a professional member of the opposition who lives in a state dacha belonging to the administrative directorate of the president and drives a BMW with flashing blue lights is fine with you?
Listen to me. If you wish to remain on the offensive yourself, you will not hear my answer.
I'm listening.
And this non-systemic opposition, what is it? It's legitimate parties. We have 50 parties altogether. We have liberalized the process of registering a political party. We have 50 of them. Whether a member of an opposition party uses a car or not is a different question. What really matters is what attitude he takes towards the authorities and the decisions proposed by the government or the ruling party on this or that issue. You probably wanted to trip me up. You won't succeed. What I want to tell you is this. There is the United Russia Party holding the majority.
Right.
Right? There are other parties who quite often disagree. There are 4 of them in the parliament. They disagree with the ruling party's point of view. But you surely remember what there was in the 1990s. You are old enough, after all. It was a mess of a parliament. Brawls were frequent and there was no chance to make a single decision. Still worse. Do you know what was still worse?
What?
It was still worse that the decisions they made were impossible to implement. The economy was boxed into a corner. That's what it led to when there was no constructive discussion. Now my question is, do you want to see them make a mess or make decisions of national importance? In this connection, I cannot but recall one well-known Russian statesman. You want great upheavals, but I want great Russia. I believe we all want great Russia, not stage shows at different levels of political power.
Absolutely. The opposition is also necessary to put a hedgehog inside the authority's skull, to make them move and work harder.
Yes, right. That's why I said that we need both systemic and non-systemic opposition. I'm saying so not as Russia's current president, but as an ordinary Russian citizen. We don't need any mess. We don't need any shows. We need serious political activity.
You know, if the opposition is non-systemic, it immediately, almost automatically becomes an enemy of the state.
Nothing of the sort. Nothing of the sort. What makes you think so? Or do you wish to think so yourself? This has nothing to do with reality. Why? We have 50 parties. 50. People must simply, you know what. You see, it is
People
necessary.
should have an opportunity to express their opinion out loud without
The
any
political
party.
consciousness of Russia's ordinary citizens has grown a lot over the past years. We may watch with pleasure someone's shocking escapades. Yes, we may like to see critics exposing somebody, but even an ordinary citizen wants to see not only somebody criticize the authorities, but to hear and understand what is proposed by those who criticize. What solutions do they propose to the problems the country is faced with? When nothing but criticism is heard in reply, then the question arises, who is worth being voted for? Who is to be elected to the local or regional legislators or the federal parliament? You know, an ordinary citizen goes to work and back home every day, and still, a plain sausage will not be enough today for earning people's support.
I just consider you as a strong person.
I hope so.
With the history in the martial arts,
I still practice today.
you still practice even more so. Not worthy to underplay. The opponent must be a worthy one. An opponent from among those who drive a BMW and reside at a state dacha, who is unlikely to argue with you in earnest.
Listen to me. Do you think that in any other democratic country, including the United States, Congress or Senate members ride a goat to work?
It's not just about the deputies.
Or a lame mayor? They use state cars there too.
It's not about the cars, really.
No, this is exactly the matter. You have in fact hinted that they are sort of being bribed. They use what the state gives them for performing their duties. They get it not from the current authorities. They get it from the state under the existing law, be it a member of the opposition or not. Once the person takes a certain office, he gets everything the state has to provide him with in accordance with the law for carrying out his duties, including those that person campaigns for and represented, and that have propelled him to a certain body of power, to parliament, for example. It's not the president who gives him a car. This is important. The president and his administrative directorate are obliged by law to provide this, regardless of whether he likes this or that deputy or party leader
It's
or
not
not.
about members or their cars.
That's the whole point. This means that the government is obliged to provide everybody with equal opportunities for performing their political functions.
My focus is rather on the political struggle, not specifically on some cars or dachas.
That's part and parcel of the political struggle. The state has to create conditions for an adherent to any views to have an opportunity to work effectively, and not to permit a situation where the parliament speaker might say, "Are you from the ruling party? Great, here's your BMW to move around, and everybody else will drive a Zaporozhets." No, everybody must enjoy equal conditions.
The middle class. Where have we lost it? We were told it would account for more than a half of the population.
Listen, do you know what the middle class is? If you think that the term middle class is about the way people live in France, Germany, or the United States, this is not so. The middle class is different in different countries. There is a relevant methodology of the World Bank. The middle class is estimated using the number of households of people whose incomes are 50% above the minimum wage. This year's minimum wage is, if I remember correctly, 11,280 rubles, while the average wage is far higher. There are such a lot of people, well above 70%.
Then our middle class should rather be called middling,
You know, we have to proceed from the realities.
within one's means.
Not within one's means, but using the methodology of the World Bank. Within one's means is a very unclear formula. The World Bank's methodology, however, suggests that each country has its own middle class. So do we. Our task is just to make this middle class
I
stronger.
wish it were like in France or
Boost
Germany.
incomes. I don't want it to be like in France.
Don't you?
Just look at what is happening there. Is there anything good about it? Protests there continue non-stop, right? Whole branches of the economy are stalled. The unrest left 11 people dead. Many were injured, lost their eyes to rubber bullets. What is so good about this? Is this what you wish? I do not think so.
The people in France went to the streets.
Yes.
Macron made a move, then backtracked.
Is this a good thing?
I don't know. For the French people, it probably is.
I do not think so. Firstly, fundamentally, nothing has changed. In the context of the reform, the most critical issue, as I see it, was the one related to the early retirement and basically equal treatment for all. From the economic standpoint, this is actually reasonable. Pragmatically, President Macron, on the whole, is doing the right thing. We, pragmatically speaking, have done the wrong thing because we have left in place practically everything. retained almost all the privileges, all privileged categories. We still have early retirement, while in France, this is the principal reason for discontent, that early retirement plans are being cancelled.
Early retirement has remained for the military
Where?
and for the law enforcement agencies here in Russia.
Not only for them, it has been preserved for coal miners, for instance, and for other categories. It has remained for teachers. We have many groups entitled to preferences. Moreover, for mothers of large families, the retirement age is 50. We need to fulfill a very important task, to raise people's real incomes. We should think about the best use of the available resources which are big enough. Our National Welfare Fund has exceeded 7% of the GDP. To be more precise, it is 7.3%. Next summer, in July as far as I remember, funds are expected to be credited to our accounts, and we are getting to the point when we will begin to spend the National Welfare Fund more actively. We agreed upon it before. We made a decision to do it when this reserve fund, and we have only one reserve fund left, the National Welfare Fund, exceeded 7%. The question is on what we should spend the money. On investment, on support for certain groups of the population, etc. This is what our discussion is revolving around today.
And now about what awaits us in 2024. Are you going to be with us forever?
If you want me to. Do you?
Me personally?
The question is in what capacity?
Well, this is what I'm talking about. And in what capacity do you see yourself?
I do not know. We
Well,
will see.
let's think about it.
I still have a lot of time.
I cannot get a clear perspective from here. I think you can see more clearly from up there, from your high position. What do you see? What horizons open up?
No, not at all. Do you know where you can see it? You can see it in public sentiment, in the desires of the people.
But the so-called elites are nervous, Mr. Putin, due to this transfer. Some certainty is needed.
I see. I understand it. The elites, yes, they might be nervous.
Do you like it?
No, I do not. It is a drawback. Such an imbalance is a real drawback. I realize this. However, the people are the primary source of power, and I'm not trying to show off. It is very important for me too. It's very important for me to feel, to understand what people want. It's a matter of principle.
So, if the people ask you to stay,
Well, I will need to think about it. Another question is in what capacity?
well, and in what capacity?
Right now, I have no answer.
You are just not ready to talk about it.
No, I am not. I still have 4 more years, and right now, I have no answer. But the most important thing is, let me repeat once again, and completely in earnest, without trying to show off. The main issue, the matter of principle, is the attitude of the vast majority of citizens. It is a matter of trust, of course.
You have already answered this question. Surely you did not think that it would all last this long.
No, it never crossed my mind. I did not think I would find myself here. It did not and it could not occur to me.
And what about dropping out of the race at some stage?
Well, you know, I feel responsible for what is going on and how, and for what will happen in the future.
Did you know in 2008 that you would be back in 2012?
No, I did not. Well, there was such an option, but of course I did not know for sure. But as an option, there was such a possibility.
As Maxim Galkin jokes, Putin is not a name, it is a post.
As a person holding no office, he can joke as he likes. And his jokes are quite in demand.
How do you react to the fact that they call you a Tsar?
It is not true to fact. Maybe someone else can be called a Tsar. However, in my case, I do not reign, I work every day. A Tsar is one who just sits there, looks from above and says, "They will do as I order," while he himself would just try on a hat and look at himself in the mirror. On the contrary, I work every day.
Я работаю каждый день.
What about your sources of information?
People like me, irrespective of the country they live in, have more or less the same sources of information, and they are quite numerous. They include sociological studies, security services reports, and the media, of course. A very important source is direct, this is very important, direct communication with the people.
Remember, Mueller used to say, "Nobody can be trusted but me." Whom do you trust?
Me?
Yes,
You know, frankly speaking,
frankly would be best.
most of all, I trust the sentiments of average people. When I communicate with people, when there is direct contact, even briefly, I think I feel the mood of the people. And that feeling has not become less keen over the years. It is still with me. And that is important for me indeed. I believe that our people are very sincere, sensitive and frank.
И откровенны.
You know, when a person meets a leader,
Yes,
especially the president,
yes.
would one blurt out all personal problems to him? You have asked me how am I at the beginning. Well, it depends. And the same goes for the ordinary people. It depends, you see?
Not everybody. Some blurt out their problems. Some discuss things. Some talk about their misfortunes. But a problem of a certain person can be very indicative of the problems faced by millions.
Excuse me, but people mind what they say. Here I am, sitting and talking to you, but trying, for many reasons, to watch my mouth, as I do not want to let down my colleagues, or to go to sunny Magadan after this interview.
There is a big difference between you and an average citizen of the Russian Federation.
What kind of difference?
It relates to you, what Vladimir Lenin once said.
I'm going to learn something interesting about myself.
He said about a group of revolutionaries that they were few and terribly far from the people.
Oh well.
This is about people like you. No offense meant. An ordinary person does not worry about any obligations that he might have to somebody. Ordinary people say what they think, and they think what they say. And they do not bother with how their superiors might react. And they just speak their mind, and what they say might be of critical importance as they speak from their heart. Speak about what they like and what they don't. I highly value that. It is truly very important to me.